Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the teams that are towards the top of or really just tiered these teams. Tried to break down where everyone sits right now, all of the real contenders, all of the ones that are sitting right on the outside looking in, but there's a ton of movement that's going to happen over the next couple of weeks, and we'll break it down when it does. But let's get into the winners and the losers from Week 4, because there was a lot going on. There was a ton of different things that happened in Week 4, and we're going to have to break it down real quickly here. And this is a crazy week, no doubt about it. And I think there was a number of teams that came out of it feeling better about where they were, but not necessarily all the way back like Michigan. And then there were teams that felt a little bit worse about where they were, but maybe not all the way bad like USC. So I think there's a lot of interesting movement here, but the biggest winner is just Michigan football. And it's not necessarily the program itself, it's just the philosophy of Michigan football. They decided to just roll up their sleeves, go to work, and just run the ball. They refused to do anything else, and frankly, I don't think they could have done anything else. So probably the good idea. I think this is a team that, frankly, they just refused to stop. There wasn't a curveball, there wasn't any changeup, there wasn't anything other than we are going to run at you. Can you stop us enough times? And USC couldn't. There was a couple of big plays that Michigan was able to break, and that was the difference in the game. And frankly, I think that's going to be the way that they're going to have to go about business going forward. It is not going to be a pretty performance pretty much any time they step on the field. It wasn't all that pretty on Saturday, at least overall. It wasn't all that pretty. But they were able to get it done. That's the goal at the end of the day. Run the ball, run the ball, run the ball, and then at some point, hopefully, you'll be able to break one like Khalil Mullings was at the end of the game, and things can change in a hurry. So Michigan football is alive and well. There's no two ways about that. Sharon Moore is going to be pounding that rock, and we'll see if it leads them to a CFP berth. But as of right now, Michigan football is definitely doing exactly what it planned to do. Hopeful young quarterbacks had a tough week, and the biggest one is Jackson Arnold by a mile. He has been benched for Michael Hawkins for this Auburn game coming up. Definitely a lot to put on that kid's shoulders going into Auburn for his very first start, but totally understand the decision. Definitely one that probably had to happen. Now the question is, where do you go from here? Because frankly, I don't think Jackson Arnold is going to be at Oklahoma at the end of the year. I think that he's going to find a new place to play. There's a lot of buzz around Mississippi State with Jeff Lebby down there, but obviously plenty of time to talk about that. I think this is a player that just kind of missed the mark, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. Not all his fault by any means. I think that offensive line is not great. I think Seth Luttrell is not doing a great job as a play caller, but overall, he obviously missed the mark just a little bit. He's going to probably have to find a new place to play, and this weekend overall was a very weird weekend for these young quarterbacks. Avery Johnson was another one that stood out, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the show, but a lot of people wanted Will Howard to be on that field on Saturday. I can promise you that. A lot of Kansas State fans that were missing him just a little bit. You also had Kyle McCord come back down to earth this weekend. So a lot of young quarterbacks that you felt pretty good about going forward. Maybe were able to either revitalize their career or really started on a strong note. Just have not thus far. And definitely this weekend was a very tough week for especially those two, Jackson Arnold and Avery Johnson. And then you had big game defenses that just absolutely dominated the weekend. Now, there was plenty of points elsewhere, especially in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. There was plenty of defense not being played. Tennessee and Michigan really won this weekend with their defenses, and then Utah put on an absolute clinic. They don't win that game even if their defense plays a little bit worse, maybe like 10% worse. They don't win that game. They had to play almost perfect football throughout that game, and man, did they. They were incredible against the run. They were awesome against the pass, and they got a lot of mistakes from Alan Bowman that weren't necessarily all his fault. There was a number of things that Utah were doing on the defensive side of the ball that made life really tough for him, and frankly, if you can't run the ball in the Big 12, you're going to have a nightmare of a season. So Oklahoma State has plenty to figure out, but a lot of the reason they weren't so successful on Saturday was because of that Utah defense. They were absolutely incredible all over the field, and the same applies to Tennessee and Michigan, and frankly, the same applies to USC and Oklahoma. So it's a bunch of teams this weekend that got really incredible game plans going into this one. I think Oklahoma's and Tennessee's were absolutely incredible. Oklahoma's was really awesome, and it was a very high-powered offense they were up against, and could not get enough from their offense to get it done. But overall, when you hold Tennessee to 25 points, you're doing something right. So really impressive, and I think I have my worries about OU's offense, but a lot of these teams asserted to me that they're very much in that CFP conversation and could make a title run with that defense that they have. A loser was Group of 5 CFP hopefuls, because a lot of them took some losses, and the two biggest ones were Northern Illinois losing to Buffalo, and then Memphis going down to Navy. And frankly, I think Memphis might be the bigger one. I understand Northern Illinois was ranked, and they had that win over Notre Dame, but I think everyone was watching Memphis throughout the entire year, possibly being that team. Now they have no margin for error. They have to win the rest of the games. They have to be able to run the table, or they're not going to get in. Plain and simple, that's kind of the end-all be-all with the group of five. Although there are a couple of teams out there that have scheduled really well that I think should probably get the benefit of the doubt, I'd be a little bit surprised if there was any 10-2 group of five team that was really in the conversation at the end of the year. So they got to figure it out in a hurry because Navy ran all over them, and that's exactly what other teams are going to try to do throughout this year. And Tulane might just be a nightmare for this team if they can't get that under control. For Northern Illinois, it's a conference game. They were coming off a really weird week. Obviously, they very much wanted to be in the CFP. There wasn't really a moment where I thought Northern Illinois was going to make that run. I don't think anyone in the MAC is really going to have all that much of an opening because the MAC's an absolute nightmare. Everyone's packed around each other. It's a lot of really, really tough teams, and I don't think anyone was really going to pull away. Toledo lost to Western Kentucky this past weekend, so that's another one to throw in there. But overall, I wasn't super surprised by those. I mean, I was obviously surprised, Northern Illinois going down at home, but I do think it was one of those things that I didn't necessarily expect either of those teams to make long-term runs. I did expect that from Memphis, and they kind of fell on their face this weekend. Then you got up-and-coming coaches had a very, very nice weekend. And there's a number to break down here, but Bob Chesney is the guy we got to talk about. He's over there at JMU and took over for a program that was undergoing as much change, as much difference from last year as really anyone in the country. Alabama, Michigan, and JMU were probably the top three when it comes to amount of things changing in that program. He jumps in and has done an incredible job. The first couple of weeks were a little bit clunky on offense at times and definitely a little bit shaky on defense, and they still have plenty of things to figure out on that side of the ball, but Bob Chesney showed that he can build a winning program, period, end of story. He showed that he can walk in I believe it was February when he got his job, and can build a winner by August. He's done an incredible job with that roster. Obviously, Alonzo Barnett is the big-time name there, but there's a number of other players that are playing really good football. They have like 5 different running backs that they like, so they're playing really good football, and I think they're a team that we have to think about when we talk about the group of 5 teams going forward. Scott Loeffler is another one to watch. His Bowling Green team is playing just really good football right now, pushing all of these Power 5 teams to the edge, and frankly, I think that might be my favorite in the MAC right about now. So 2 coaches definitely to watch, and frankly, there's going to be a lot more that show up throughout the rest of the year, especially with a lot of the news going on around coaching searches right now. And then you kind of had winners and losers this weekend, but new conference teams, at least in big-time games, had a little bit of a tough week. Utah did get the one win, but Oklahoma and USC had tough landings in their new conferences, no doubt about that. OU kind of got that welcome to SEC moment with just absolutely no offense to speak of, and Tennessee just dominating them up front. USC kind of the exact same thing. Michigan had 32 passing yards and was able to win the game, and that is the Big Ten. So it definitely a little bit of a welcome to your new conference type moment for those teams. Obviously, Utah kind of handed it back to Oklahoma State this weekend, and then you had Arizona State come on the wrong side of this thing, and then you had a couple other teams get that win in their first game. So it was a little bit of up and down weekend, but when you talk about that OU and USC losses, definitely tough and definitely shows how much of a difference some of these teams are going to have to face going into those new conferences. And then you got homecomings. This was incredible to watch. If you're not an Oklahoma fan, I will put that out there. But Josh Heupel said all the right things leading up to this one. He was very, very kind of dismissive of the idea that this one was a bigger one for him, that it meant more to him. I can promise you it did. You saw that if you did see that post-game speech he gave in the locker room, you can tell how much that meant to him. And frankly, it had to be very satisfying to walk back into your home state, back into the stadium that you brought a national title in 2000, get that win, the team that fired you not too long ago. And frankly, I think it was kind of a reminder that everything happens for a reason, even in the coaching world where a lot of stuff seems like it doesn't. There's definitely a lot of craziness that happens in the coaching carousel, but everything worked out for him, that's for sure. He was able to find his way from Missouri to UCF to Tennessee and has done an incredible job ever since. So this had to be very satisfying for him. I know he was very nice in front of the media and wasn't, saying this was a big one for him. It definitely meant a lot to him, and you could tell it from his players' reaction, you could tell it from his reaction, and it was just very, very cool to see for him. The state of North Carolina had a very tough week. I'll be totally honest with you guys. UNC and NC State will obviously steal the headlines, and they definitely should. They were downright terrible, and everyone's talking about that Florida State game at the end of the year. UNC NC State is going to be downright gross as well. So definitely some sickos that will be watching that, some college football sickos. But at the end of the day, this was a tough week. UNC got beat by a million. They have a million things to figure out. NC State got beat by a million, and they have a million things to figure out. And then you even go a little bit below. Charlotte got dominated by Indiana. ECU fell in a big-time game to Liberty. App State got absolutely rolled on Thursday. Basically, if you were a college football fan in the state of North Carolina, you had a very tough weekend. So hopefully it goes better for you going forward. Hopefully these teams find their groove and can give the people of North Carolina a little bit more to cheer about. But overall, this weekend was about as tough on those people than it was on pretty much anyone else in the country. And overall, I think there was a lot of winners and losers. Probably didn't even scratch the surface of the number of people that I could have put in that group. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to see this all throughout the year. There's going to be so much movement. There's going to be so much bouncing around with the new 12-team playoff that breaking this down in those terms makes it feel a little bit more manageable. But it's going to be craziness throughout the next couple of weeks. And as we head into conference play, it's going to be off the walls. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to do all the questions going into week 4, coming out of week 4, all the different things that I just kind of am curious about as we head into week 5, coming out of week 4, and I think one of the biggest questions I have is, can we fix the Heisman this year? And I'll talk about exactly what I mean right after this, so stick with us.